Okay, I think people are still coming in. No, I think pretty much everyone's in. Okay, well, welcome. Good morning, and thanks for being with us today. And you're at the NHT webinar on Take a Moment with Education Support. I'm Andy Walls. I'm just doing continuity really, and Sinéad Mc Brearty is our featured speaker and is there on screen. You can see her, and in between Sinéad and myself is Tim, who will be introducing her. So I'm just going to do a few housekeeping things while people come in the front door, as it were. Thanks so much for being with us. Thanks for taking the time away from your school, your college, your setting, and we really appreciate you doing that today. We've been online for a year now, so hopefully we've just about got this right, and hopefully at some stage we'll move to face-to-face. But today we're looking at exactly that range of issues with Education Support, Sinéad Mc Brearty. Just on housekeeping, Sinéad is going to talk to some slides. We will share those with you. We'll send those out to you within 24 hours of today's feature presentation. Just so you know, and I think it said on the slide at the start, the name you've chosen to be known as will appear in the chat bar so people can see whatever you've chosen to call yourself today. So it's just a feature of Zoom, and we're recording the session because again that's the Zoom thing, and we'll put this up on YouTube. There's a chat box. You know where the chat box is. If you move your cursor, it's down at the bottom. So please feel free to drop questions, comments, thoughts, reflections on that as Sinéad's going, and we'll have a poll at the end. And that's probably all I need to say on housekeeping. I'm going to pass you over to Tim Bowen to say a few words, and then Sinéad will take a moment with you. Okay, so I'll drop off and leave you to Tim.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on this Take a Moment Wellbeing webinar. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Sinéad Mc Brearty, who, as we've said, is the Chief Executive Officer of Education Support, a charity who focuses on the well-being and the mental health of those who work in schools. I've had the great honour of taking over as the National President of NAHT. It's been about 6 weeks ago now, and one of my main areas that I want NAHT to focus on, and I personally will focus on in the year ahead, is precisely that, the well-being of school leaders. And therefore I was absolutely delighted when Education Support agreed to work closely in partnership with NAHT as my presidential charity for the year ahead. I'm in my 25th year as a head teacher. And like many of you, I've experienced many highs, and I still truly believe that despite all the pressures and stresses, it is a terrific job. But that said, I've also, no doubt, like many of you, have experienced a number of lows. And I think that the demands and the pressures of the job have increased significantly over the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years for a whole host of reasons. And I've long been concerned about the well-being of my fellow NAHT members. And this was before I'd ever heard of the COVID-19 pandemic. But then the challenge and the experience of managing one's school through the last 15 months has been absolutely significant for us all. And I don't think we must underestimate the toll this has taken and just how emotionally drained many school leaders are. And therefore, I think it is absolutely the right time for NAHT to be encouraging and supporting school leaders to focus on their well-being. I was fortunate enough to attend a webinar early in January that Sinéad was the guest speaker at. And there was a line, Sinéad, that you said that really stuck in my mind. You said, talking about school leaders, that self-care is not self-indulgence. And that really hit home to me. If we're there to be supporting, managing, leading, encouraging, guiding our staff to do that effectively, we have to take good care of ourselves. And hopefully today's webinar, and by attending this, is one way of doing that. Just a brief introduction then for Sinéad. As I said, she's the Chief Executive Officer of Education Support. She's worked for that charity since April 18. She began her career at KPMG before moving to the not-for-profit sector. And she's been the Deputy Chief Executive at Social Enterprise London and Director at the award-winning social enterprise Women Like Us. And she's also been a visiting lecturer in the past at both Imperial College London and the Royal College of Art. And I'm sure, Sinéad, you're an incredibly busy lady, but in your limited free time, I was delighted to see that you also serve as a governor, a school governor at a primary school in South London. As I've said, I am absolutely delighted that Education Support is going to be working closely with NAHT in the year ahead. We really appreciate you giving of your time today, and along with all those attending, I'm looking forward to listening to you, to learning from you, and reflecting with you. So Sinead, thank you very much again for being here today. Over to you.
Thanks a million for the very generous welcome, Tim. Very much appreciated. And I was tickled by Andy's reference in his introduction to the feature presentation. It put me in mind of Saturday afternoon westerns, as my father used to describe going to the cinema. So I don't know what the western title for this talk might be, a gallop through the well-being badlands. I'm not sure. We'll see. But thanks a million for taking the time out to come and join us this morning. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the work of education support, what we do as a charity, but then talk to you about well-being, both as it applies to your staff teams, but also to yourselves, and hopefully give you a few things to think about in that. And delighted to take questions and to stop and have a conversation about various points. So do feel free to register any observations or questions you might have. So the charity education support has been around for, well, since 1877. So we've been in the well-being business long before it became fashionable. And in terms of what we do now, we think about our work at 3 levels. We provide free support and advice for anyone working in education. And this helpline number is accessible to anyone working in your school if they need to talk to someone. And it's staffed by qualified counsellors. It is there to support people, to whether that's to have a conversation about something they feel a little bit uncomfortable about or they're not sure about, or whether it's somebody who's genuinely in need of support because they're not in a good place at all. So there's a range of things that we can do through that helpline, and I'd encourage you to share that number far and wide. There's also the grants that we provide to people who are in financial distress. These are small grants, but can make the difference to people being able to stay in their job, for example, or stay in their home. And as we come to the end of the furlough period, we anticipate there'll be a lot more pressure on this grant pot, partly because even if people who are working in your schools have relatively secure employment, if they're in relationships and their partner doesn't, there are going to be a lot of families and households hit by hardship in the coming couple of years. So that's a useful one to remember. And we have a lot of digital content available through the Teachers Hub that gives teachers and indeed school leaders useful content around well-being, around mental health, practical tools that you can use in your own schools. We also then, so if the first level of support is for individuals, we also work with schools, colleges, MATs and local authorities, and we provide a number of services there. We are a provider of employee assistance programs, so we've worked very hard to create a quality program that's education focused. We also provide facilitated peer support for school leaders and indeed individual supervision for school leaders. Both of these things are provided on a pilot basis at the moment, but we're looking at how we can roll those out and make them more widely available. But there are opportunities for school leaders to reflect. And we've found through the evaluation work we've done this year that opportunities to reflect with colleagues or with a professional have made a very significant difference to the school leaders that have chosen to use them in terms of them, I suppose, sustaining their own resilience and keeping going in this incredible period of time that we have been through and continue to go through. And the third level of our work then goes beyond maybe the issues facing individual people or individual schools and colleges and looks at the wider system. What is it that we can do to influence the education system to basically make improvements so that it supports better well-being across the workforce? So we produce an annual index that's benchmarking that, so we can hold a mirror up and talk to government about the health of the education workforce. We also are part of various government advisory groups trying to advocate for better well-being and producing resources with the BBC and stuff like that. That's probably enough of an introduction. So if we go on, and my slides seem to have stuck, one of the things I want to start out with is just sharing with you the very strong findings when we talked to teachers after the first lockdown and tried to understand what was it that was positive, what made a difference to their well-being during that first lockdown. We found that people rated collegiality, their relationships in the school, as really critical to keeping them going, and appreciation. And that's appreciation from their leaders, and indeed school leaders themselves also felt appreciated by governing bodies and by trust boards. But these 2 points have been hugely important to keeping people feeling well. And I think there's an enormous pat on the back due here to school leaders, because the extent of positivity that school staff felt during the lockdowns was really quite surprising, because we knew that they were working under very difficult circumstances. But there was a real sense of, we're in this together, we're a team in our school, in our college, we're supporting each other, and we're going to get through it together. And actually, I see what you're doing and you see what I'm doing. And there's great job satisfaction and recognition in that. It's very motivating for people, and enables them to, get up and do it again the next day. So I think that's something to take real heart from, because it's been such a positive feature in this period of time. But all of that falls against the backdrop of ongoing high levels of stress across the profession, barriers to reaching out for help. So one of the reasons I'm delighted that Tim invited Education Support to be your charity of the year is the opportunity for us to have conversations about mental health, about asking for help, about staying well and well-being, and maybe breaking down some of these barriers that exist in schools across the country, where people don't feel that they can ask for help. People don't feel that they can put their hand up and say, actually, this stress is really causing me to be unwell, or I have a mental health issue that's been diagnosed. A lot of people feel afraid to share that in their work environment, more so in schools than in other places of employment. So there's some work for us to do in the sector there. And the backdrop is, unfortunately, that the well-being of our educators is a little bit lower than the general population. So again, this is something that we go back to government and say, look, that's clearly not sustainable. What can we do to make sure that our education workforce is not less well than the general population, but actually is fit and as well as everybody else? So there's work for us to do on that, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we might approach that. And I'm just going to bring this particular set of data to your attention. We did some work in March, largely based on our concern about school leaders. We had a number of conversations with school leaders who were, many of you are exhausted, and very understandably so, but we saw a few more symptoms. And so we wanted to look at burnout and understand whether that was or wasn't a real thing on the ground. What we found was, if you look here, a lot of people experiencing some of these elements of burnout, some of the time, some or all of the time, but actually a really chunky proportion of people experiencing them all of the time. And that is really important, because if we have people, including ourselves, that close to burnout, then that really is a red flashing light for us. And the thing with burnout is, you don't burn out and then have a week off and bounce back. When people are burnt out, it can take a very long time actually to come back and be able to put yourself back together sufficiently to be able to come and do a day's work again. So this is something that, again, we're flagging with policymakers, but is really important, I think, actually for us to notice in ourselves. One of the things that struck me at the time that we produced this report in, I think, April, was actually my own well-being. I started to read this and think, well, I'm pretty exhausted personally. I don't feel like I'm necessarily doing a great job at the moment. And I thought, oh, hang on, these are indicators of burnout. And so my response to that was, firstly, to feel a bit bad and guilty. I mean, I run a mental health charity and I'm feeling a bit burnt out. That's not great, really. But when I got past that, actually, I was able to take some action and decided to have, third gear fortnight, as I termed it, where I was very intentionally moving down into third gear, choosing to not do anything that could wait. So, instead of being very on top of everything and getting all the things done well ahead of time and so on, I just stopped and did as little as I could do for 2 weeks, and made a point of getting out, going to my allotment, playing tennis, cooking a proper dinner. And actually doing that for a fortnight, just taking my foot off the pedal a little bit, nothing, the wheels didn't fall off anything. That made a difference to just allow me to recover slightly. So when it came to the weekend, I wasn't collapsing. Actually, I'd had a very light week. I was able to go out and enjoy the weekend. And that's quite nourishing, put me in a much better place, and actually made some inroads into this kind of exhaustion. Now, for many of you, you'll have been carrying things for such a long time that it's a bigger proposition, and you do really need a genuine full break. But I suppose I share that personal story with you because I think it's really important to be able to talk about this and to be able to say, actually, I think it's far better for my charity that I look after myself and that I am in good shape, able to do my job, than that I bash out all the tasks that, you know, ideally I would. And so there's a balancing act there, but starting to see our own well-being, our own health as a really important aspect of our job, to look after that. So what do we do about all this well-being stuff and those not so lovely points that I raised in terms of the evidence about well-being? Well, we think about well-being as being at the intersection between the individual, the workplace, and the system. So there are factors at the level of the, you know, something might affect me as a person, and that's very foreground. That's very, you know, if something's going on in my private life that is having a negative impact on me, that's going to be very front of mind. But even if there isn't, and if my, you know, private life is actually fine and I'm happy and content, I may be in a workplace that doesn't fit me, or where I'm having conflict with my line manager, or something difficult is going on. And if that's the case, then that will have a negative impact on my well-being. And there's global studies that tell us that our occupational, our workplace well-being makes up about 1/4 of our overall life well-being. So it's a substantial part of us feeling well. So you may, you know, you may be grand privately, your workplace might not be a great place to be. That's going to have a negative impact on you. Or it may be that you're fine yourself, your workplace suits you, it's a nice place to work, but actually you look around at the wider system you're part of and you find that a bit demoralizing. You know, maybe you've just had one Ofsted inspection too many, or you've read a Daily Mail headline and you thought, why aren't people understanding what it is that we do? There are lots of impacts here that will also affect people. So even though this is much further away than something that might be happening to me personally, it does matter. And so these are the 3 dimensions that we talk about when we're thinking about the well-being of school leaders, college leaders, and education staff more broadly. And to give you some examples of that, if we think about the system end of that, well, it's fairly straightforward to recognize. I think we all know that workload is an issue. The World Health Organization has just published some data that long working hours are actually fundamentally very negative for our physical health. But it's not just about number of hours worked, it's about work intensity, and it's about the type of work. And we know that accountability can drive types of work that does not energize educators. Similarly, professional identity, the extent of trust that we feel, whether we feel recognized and valued as a profession, is important here. And then the other accountability, you know, wider accountability pressure, not just around workload, that shapes the education system. These are all factors that ultimately, one way or another, will impact the well-being of our workforce. Then the workplace the workplace aspects of this that become important. Well, culture and leadership is above and beyond anything else in any school or college, the single most important thing affecting the well-being of the people working there. And there's lots of evidence in the literature about, if you care about that sort of thing, about the importance of culture and leadership. But that is just the most important thing, how the leader thinks about well-being, how they role model well-being, how they interact with their staff, the way that they hold staff, whether they're quite transactional or they're very relational. This is the stuff that really matters in terms of well-being. And then there are a number of tools you can use at an institution level, whether it's having a well-being strategy, doing surveys with your staff regularly, having policies and making sure that people have access to counselling, and actually line management is really critical. We don't have consistently good line management development in our schools and colleges. And that's a place that we could do some work on, because line manager relationships are critical for how people feel about their work. And it's a place where we can get a lot of grit in the oyster. So a really easy win for us to focus on that and make sure that we have good, consistent line management approaches. And then for the individual, well, we've already talked about workload, and at an individual level, that is really important. If somebody is working, you know, silly hours, or they are doing a type of work more often than not, and it's kind of taking away from the stuff that they love in the job, or whether they're just working at such a pace that there isn't time to breathe. And of course, for a lot of people in the last year, that's been the case, particularly where people have been working flat out in the day job and then maybe trying to deal with their own kids' education or the care needs of elders, or, you know, work has not just been in the day job over the last year for a lot of people. And so the amount of strain on a person becomes very important for us to understand. Professional development is really important. It is, it makes people, it gives people resilience. We call it protective resilience. It kind of puts money in the bank that they can draw out later if it's good professional development. And that might be something that allows them to look up and look out rather than being very narrow. You know, nobody wants to do an inset day on, I don't know, how to administer lateral flow tests. This isn't going to be very compelling for anyone in your school or college, I don't suppose. But good quality CPD or development space that allows people to reflect. And that might be coaching or mentoring or peer support or supervision indeed, which is increasingly important. And by supervision, I mean external support that allows professional support, that allows the individual to reflect on their work, to think about their practice as a leader, as a SENCO, as a DSL, whatever it might be. And also as part of that, to think about how that role impacts their own well-being and to just process that and then let it go. I think too many people are dealing with complicated social and emotional issues in our schools and then carrying it around, and they don't have the opportunity to process it. And actually, if we were working in hospitals or we were working in social services, there would be infrastructure to allow people to process those sorts of issues. So I think supervision is something you're going to hear a lot more about over the next couple of years. The emotional content of the role. So what I was just saying, you know, I've spoken to particularly safeguarding leads, of course, often they're in leadership roles anyway, or SENCOs similarly. And they're dealing with really intense and difficult situations. In fact, they were long before COVID, but through COVID, there's been, you know, a lot of difficult stories that have come to the fore. And our education workforce isn't trained in dealing with these very complex emotional, social issues. And yet there's nobody else there to pick up the pieces. So paying attention to where that's happening in your workforce and making sure that we're supporting people dealing with those things is hugely important. And then reflecting for yourself, because you're almost certainly as school leaders actually in a lot of those difficult conversations. And just taking a moment to think about how that sits with you and whether you've got access to professional development that's going to allow you to just talk that through with somebody and then be able to reflect on what you've learned from it and what you might want to do with that, and to then move on, I think is absolutely just so important for all of us. And safety. We know for individuals, gosh, did we ever learn the significance of health and safety, but over this past, 16, 17 months, we know that it's critically important that people feel safe at work and that we do what we can to make them feel safe. And actually, if we've done the limit of what we can do, that we're then transparent about what we can't do or what we don't know, I think is the best that we can offer the people working with us. So then I want to just draw your attention to some of the symptoms of, I suppose, poor well-being that can come in clusters. And, you know, any one of us will have had most, if not all of these at some time or another. What's important, I think, is to notice if you're having clusters of these symptoms, patterns of these symptoms routinely. And if you are, then it is probably an indicator that, you know, you might not have recognized that there's something going on for you, but there may well be something that is just affecting your well-being. It may be the attrition that, you know, the war of attrition that this past 15 months has been, or it may be caused by particular things going on in the moment. But if you do notice these clusters of symptoms like these, the really important thing is do not ignore them. This is not a moment to be butch and brave. If we were going to go back to Andy's feature presentation and imagine ourselves in a Western for a minute, this isn't a moment to be the lone hero galloping out into the desert, you know, because when we ignore clusters of symptoms like these, we end up in real difficulty. If we don't attend to what are relatively mild symptoms, we leave our bodies really with no alternative but to have a bigger symptom. And that's not a pleasant or safe place to be. So if you notice these in yourself, pause, stop, just think a little bit about when you're finding that, what seems to trigger it, what makes it worse, what makes it better, and try and notice for yourself a bit of what's going on. And then have a chat with someone. We've got the NAHT helpline. We support the NAHT in running that. You've got the education support helpline. There's all sorts of people who can listen and are trained to listen. And there is no shame in having a conversation with somebody about that. It might be an action you take that actually keeps you well. So I would just counsel you to do a little reflecting on that. When you get these slides later, just sit there and have a think and try and notice for yourself. And then, of course, if you're seeing these things in other people, you may also want to have a chat with them and help them understand that there's no shame in this. We've been through an extraordinary period of time. Everybody has every right to feel rubbish. Everybody has every right to not feel well. And it's not a contest to see, you know, which frog can stay in the pot of boiling water the longest. So I think beginning to have those conversations where you see this with others is also really important. Then I just want to draw your attention also to some kind of really basic simple kind of hygiene factors, I think of them as, around mental health. Things that if we can remember to do, help us stay well. And that's partly, you know, again, this is still a period of time where anything goes in terms of the responses that we have. We don't need to judge ourselves. We don't need to evaluate them. We're having, you know, we have all sorts of responses to being in pandemic, to the social isolation, to the I haven't seen my parents since December 2019. And as a grown woman in her mid-40s, if I start weeping about that, that's fine. I don't need to judge myself about that because we're in strange times. Exercise, we all know this, but there is so much evidence. Exercise changes our mood, lifts our mood, keeps us well. You know, even keeping your body fit and healthy, but also just the act of moving is super positive. And if you're not feeling great, you could, you know, there's very little better than just going for a walk. Go for, you know, you don't have to run, you don't have to do press-ups, just go for a brisk walk. And there's huge value in that. Eating well, we all know this, but I'll repeat it anyway. Moderating our sugar and our alcohol in terms of how much we drink, but also how we use alcohol. Many of us in the last year have seen alcohol as, oh, thank God I can have a drink. You know, it's the moment where I can relax, or I can treat myself for getting through this very difficult time. And we just need to be careful, I suppose, of the habits that we form around that, because it's very easy to form habits that you might not want, actually. So, you know, I like a nice pint and a good glass of wine with the rest of them. But it's important for us to just pay attention to how we're using alcohol. Good sleep habits, managing what we, you know, social media can be fantastic, just managing how we use it and what we're looking at. Gratitude. When I started working in this field, I kind of saw, you know, people talking about gratitude. I have to say I rolled my eyes to the heavens because I thought, really, do I have to do this? And then I, you know, read some of the research around it, and it is extraordinary. And I will say, I tried to put this into practice myself, and it is unavoidable that if we turn our attention to the things that we can be grateful for, it does lift our mood. It does help us to not get dragged down into the things that are difficult. It's a good counterbalance for much of what is out there at the moment. Particularly when, you know, you don't want to put the news on and hear that it's going to be another 4 weeks or whatever else. Stopping and thinking, what are the things I have to be grateful for, actually really does make a difference. Finding ways to be creative, whether that's gardening or painting or knitting or making it, you know, cooking a different dinner, whatever it is. Again, being creative is very positive for our well-being. Being out in nature, talking about our feelings. Many of us, I suspect, are of a generation where we didn't grow up talking about our feelings because that's just not what you did. And it turns out now that it's quite a good thing. Psychologically, it's quite good for us to talk about our feelings. And if we can find somebody to do that with who validates us and allows us to feel supported, it's a very, very positive thing to do. Often, again, if it's with the right person, when we talk about our feelings or we talk about what's going on, we hear things for ourselves. It's not that the other person is going to give us some magic wisdom, but in the process of talking, we articulate things often for the first time for ourselves. And when you hear yourself say something out loud, you can have those aha moments where you realize, actually, oh, that's what's going on. I see. And when it's in your awareness, you can be choiceful about how you deal with it. But of course, if it's not in your awareness, you don't have so many choices. So learning to talk about our feelings, either with trusted loved ones or, again, using the helplines. We've got trained people who are trained in having conversations. That's what they're there for. You know, there's all manner of opportunities to do that. And finally, accepting uncertainty. You know, we can't change how, or you and I as individuals, perhaps the NAHT can, but as individuals, we can't change how the government thinks about education or what they will and won't invest in recovery. But we can focus our minds back on the things that we can affect and change, and just accept that there's a bunch of stuff that we don't know. And in that acceptance, that doesn't mean that you stop being political or you stop taking other action in concert with others, but it just personally to not hold that so heavily, like you have to find the answer, I think is easing. You know, it just allows us to not be so jangled, maybe so annoyed all the time. And that's good for our personal well-being. So finding a place to be political but not annoyed is quite a good space, because you've got doing something purposeful, but you're not holding it personally. I think there's something in there, and just accepting this uncertainty. And we don't know. I don't know if I will get to Ireland this summer. I could ruminate on that and I could get quite upset about it if I did. But, you know, it's far better for me personally to just think, okay, I don't know. I accept that and we'll see where we get to. This is for Tim. So you can read that slide, and I hope in what I've said before, I've made the case to you that this is the case. Self-care is just a critical part of your practice as a leader. You will be a less good leader if you do not look after yourself. So you can let go of any guilt or judgment you place on that, and just start to see it as a core part of doing a good job. And as professionals, that's what we're trying to do. And now the slides have stuck. What have we got? This is the Mc Brearty theory of well-being. So I want to leave you, I suppose, with this. It's really complicated, so take a deep breath. In terms of well-being, whether it's your own, a loved one, or your workforce in the school or college that you're in, there's only really two things you can do. You can reduce the stressors on people, and you can increase the things that give them resilience. That's kind of those are your strategies right there. That's pretty much all you can do. And in this year, you may not be able to reduce stress dramatically, but anywhere you can, it's worth doing. Protective resilience, these are the things that nourish us and feed us, and you know, that idea of money in the bank that you can draw later. And if we can boost those, it means people are better able to deal with these stresses when they come along. So if you start to think about it in that way, I think it becomes much easier than going, oh, I don't know what to do. How do I do anything? Okay, let me think. Is there anything stressful I can take out of the equation here? Or is there anything positive that is energizing, boosting, and nourishing that I can add in? And that's it. That's the end of my great theory. And the sorts of things that you might want to think about adding in, you know, our purpose is very important to who we are and what we do. And for educators, it's so core. So coming back to reflecting on that purpose and thinking about it is always a good place to start. Self-efficacy, the extent to which we feel we can make a difference in leading our schools or in teaching our class or whatever it is, again, for you or for the people you're working with. Coming back and finding the ways that you can get the evidence for yourself and get the feedback that tells you that, you know, you do make a difference. This is very important to helping us stay well as also. Reflective practice, I talked about this around supervision, but whether it's in a supervision session or mentoring or coaching or whatever, finding a safe space to reflect on how you go about, you know, being the leader that you are. is hugely valuable. And also, you know, the kind of introspection that takes you maybe a bit more personally on what does this leadership thing, what does it cost me? What does it require of me? And how can I then replenish that? These are really productive conversations to be having. Collegiality, those relationships that are so important to everyone working in education. Professional development we spoke about, and then presenteeism I put up in there because we actually still have far too many people in the sector coming to work when they're not well, and it's profoundly unhelpful. It's just not where we want to be. If people are unwell, if you're unwell, just get better and then come back. Ultimately, that's a far more productive way of going about business than kind of dragging yourself in and doing a not great day's work. Again, this has been studied at length. We're better off just stay at home, get well, then come back. And there's a lot of role modeling we can do here as leaders. There was a slide at the end with the contact details for the charity and the helpline again, and those will be circulated to you. But that's probably a good place for me to stop, Andy and Tim.
Okay, thank you, Sinead. I like the abruptness of your endings, as if the curtain suddenly came down on Saturday morning pictures, going with that as a theme. Really fantastic presentation, and really energizing. I'm sure if people would like to ask questions, I mean, the best way, I guess, is to turn on the cameras and pop up on screen and say hello. Or alternatively, we do have a chat function if people want to drop questions in the chat. Somebody jumped on them but jumped off again. Obviously pressed the wrong button. I mean, I think while people are thinking, I suppose the question that comes through to me, Sinead, is why are people in the caring profession so bad at looking after themselves first? It just does seem a theme that constantly comes through on these things. You're on mute, by the way, Sinead. And
I'm on mute still. Okay. I'm still on mute all these months later. I mean, and there is research into this, and it just is it is a feature of people who are working in caring professions. I suppose, you know, I think this comes out of, actually, I think it's part of how many of us have kind of, again, grown up, and the values that we grow up with. And I think historically there was a view that, you know, if I attend to myself, I'm taking away from the people I work with. Mm. And I think that's a view that we've held, and it's a sort of, you know, it's really important. I hold the values of being of service. That would be important to me. But I think what I didn't understand until I really read widely on this is that I will be of less good service if I don't attend to my own needs. Mm. And that's not so much in our history. I don't think many of us have. There aren't that many of us who've grown up with a really clear sense of that. And so I think when you feel like if I look after myself, I'm taking away some energy or some resource that should be going on the kids or whatever. I think that can be a tension for people. And actually, this is just quite simple to reframe for ourselves. I take a lot of heart from the data, from the evidence in the literature, because that's kind of how I work. But I got to get permission from that and go, oh, look, there's loads of really good evidence that if I take care of myself, I will do a better job for the people that I'm here to do a good job for. And I think if we can reframe it in that way, it stops being such a binary win-lose situation, and actually start to see looking after ourselves as that really important part of professional practice.
Thank you. Yeah. The expression I've heard is about putting on your own air supply first before attending to others, and that's very much how that feels. Yeah. I see Tim Bowen's appeared at the top. Tim, are you going to come in and intervene, or?
I thought I'd like to see more of, and I'd like to know your comments, Sinead. I think as part of the general teacher training, there should be whether it's a module or certainly far more input to those training to be teachers on all the things you've been talking about now, because as we know, I think the statistic is something huge. I think it's a 40% of teachers leave in the first few years. Now, there'll always be some turnover, obviously, but it's far too high. So I think the emphasis on you know, looking after oneself, one's well-being, good mental health should become far more of a feature of teacher training. And I also think for those who are stepping up, both in middle leadership positions, and I was really interested in your comments about as a profession, you know, better line management development is crucial, but also those doing MPQH. The deputy at my school has just completed successfully MPQH. MPQH, and I mean, it was a colossal amount of work for her. But I'm not too sure, as part of the MPQH course, whether actually in preparation for school leadership, there was much, if any, of all the vital work you've been talking about here. I mean, the phrase I always used with my newly qualified teachers at my school: look, this is a marathon. It is not a sprint. You've got to pace yourself, but I think it's the caring for yourself, and for school leaders as well. And again, the turnover of school leaders, as we know, in those first few years of headship is huge. Do you think, so I'm a bit on my soapbox now, but do you think that we're likely to see, or will your charity be able to, along with NAHT, influence greater input into training at both school leaders and newly qualified teachers to hopefully enable them to do better jobs and stay the course?
I mean, I think that's a lovely point for us to pick up jointly together and advocate for that. I don't think there is enough. I know that it's been put in to some extent with the ITT stuff and the early career framework, but it's thin content. If I said that with a very Irish accent, I meant THIN rather than TIN. But it's not substantial enough. And I think that there is a lot of work to do still with policymakers. I think there's more of an acceptance now that this stuff is beyond, it's not just about yoga and fruit bowls and fluffiness. There is a real business case. We're losing billions of pounds of the education budget each year to poor mental health and well-being. So I think that is understood, and there is some attention being paid to thinking about what could happen differently. But you're really right. I mean, you're so right that the most important place to get this is up front. If we can build it into how people are learning about their roles, whether it's coming into the profession at all, or whether it's moving up to a leadership role, that's the place to help people embed good practice. And you've seen me talk about this. I've read quite widely on all of this. We do a lot of work. We've been in this business for 140 whatever years. It's not rocket science. It's not complicated. It's actually quite straightforward, and there's some small practical steps we can all take today, actually, that make a difference. So I think that would be a lovely thing, Tim, for us to jointly maybe lobby for.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I'm waiting to see if anybody's being brave and going to pop up and ask a question. And you see now, is that Fanula?
Fanula. Yeah. So I'm from a school that really values well-being of staff and everybody, but the real issue that we have is around finance, because it takes time to talk to people. It takes time to give, to be able to give people time out to come to terms with things. And our budget is smaller than ever, and that's an issue. I'm not. I think this is. I completely. I take on board what has been said today, and I completely agree with it. I just feel so frustrated that we can't implement it more because of financial constraints, especially as we find a lot of. We're dealing a lot with parents' anxieties, and that's quite time consuming as well. But we haven't. It is time, and I'm having to cut back as much because of money constraints. And I just wanted to put that forward, as that's the reality of where we are, and it's really frustrating, very frustrating.
I really feel for you with that, Fanula. When I've had an opportunity to speak to ministers, the first thing I talk to them about is you need to put more money in the system, because people cannot do well-being when their schools are in the financial straits that they are. I'm a governor of a small 1.5 form-entry primary school, so we don't have scale. And we're local authority maintained. We're not in a trust. Money is very, very tight, and I really do recognise the importance of that. So I will say to you that it is the thing that I ask for before anything else. And I've said to civil servants and with ministers, there's no point talking about well-being if you don't resource schools, full stop. It's just pointless, because we don't need big programs of training people to be counsellors, or we just need we need a few extra adults in the school to be able to deal with the workload that's there. And then there'll be a bit of space for people to breathe. So you really are between a rock and a hard place. And the only thing, the only way this works is to make difficult decisions, and that's painful. So I'm not saying to you that's a way forward, but we cannot do everything in small schools in particular. We just cannot do everything. So whether there is anything at all that can be let go that's currently happening in order to free up space, that's the only way, I think, in the absence of new money, that something useful can be done. And it's a really hard thing, because it means making difficult decisions. Because I know, without meeting you, that you're not doing anything extraneous. You're not doing anything extra that you feel like you could let go, because that will have already gone in the last 3-4 years. But it's looking again and thinking, can we reconfigure how we operate? Is there any way in structuring ourselves that we might be able to claw back a little bit of time somewhere to be able to give people a break? And until new money's released, there's nothing else, I think, that you can, in your situation, usefully do, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we do. And we have nurture groups, we have mentors, and we do all of those things. But it's the staff that I'm worried about, because there's not a lot of give, and I'm asking a lot of them.
Yep.
For the benefit of the children, it is a frustrating, because I want to look after my staff as well, and I have a fantastic staff who do give everything, but I just have to be mindful I'm not putting too much on them.
Well, I think that's it. And I think also for you yourself, because you're then holding a lot too, which is, the situation that everyone who's in your shoes would recognize. You're holding a lot to keep all of them well. Yeah. One of the things that might be useful to your staff, and on our website, the Teacher Hub bit that's on the first slide whenever they come around, we'll be releasing just at the end of this month, funded by Welsh Government. It's for Wales, but you can access it from here. An e-learning, 45-minute e-learning about reflective conversations that gives people the kind of tools to have reflective conversations in pairs. Doesn't cost anything. Obviously, it does require time, but it might be a very simple, just one simple thing that allows people, that gives people a structure to talk within the staff team. That might be helpful. And we will continue to try, particularly while finance remains the way it is, we will continue to try and produce resources that are free. I can't magic up the time, but we'll try and do everything that we can to keep things low cost or no cost.
And I think actually one of the things that has worked well for us is sort of clusters of staff who all staff members have somebody that they can, it may be in little groups, Brilliant. But they support each other, and that peer support is really helpful.
That's rocket fuel, that's the stuff that keeps people going. So if you've got that, you're doing a great job, and I'm just sorry there isn't more resource available to let you do more.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Thanks for being brave enough to come and talk to us, and for raising that really important point about funding. I'm conscious of time. I can see Tim's here. Tim, is there anything else you want to add in at this point, or?
No, I don't know. We've got a Jill Kidwell. I can see her name. I don't know whether she wishes to say anything or ask a question. There's one other point I could make, but I think I can see another name appear on my screen.
All right.
Is Jill Kidwell there?
Perhaps we should all join hands. Jill, are you there?
No, not to I. I just didn't want to deprive somebody. The other main.
She is there. She said yes.
Oh, she said yes. Well, let Jill please ask her make her point to Sinead.
Jill, you're welcome to come on. If you don't want to turn your camera on, you're welcome not to. You can just turn your mic on and just speak to us. Yeah. Okay, well, Jill's maybe having some technical problems, but if you can join us, Jill, do. While Jill's thinking, Tim, perhaps if you make the point you were going to make, and then we'll come back
Yes,
to it.
I mean, as I say, I've been ahead for quite some time now, and again, another of the points you made, Sinead, that really rang true to me is accountability pressure is one of the huge things that causes unnecessary workload that adds to stress. I mean, I don't know how successfully, but most of my headship trying to take the pressure of my staff. I wanted to reduce as far as I could, the administrative burdens, the unnecessary workload, the tick boxing, so they had the energy and the joy to teach in class. To me, that was the most important thing what they did, that they turned up fresh, full of enthusiasm, not bogged down by unnecessary paperwork. But you know, the pressures of accountability and thinking, oh, we've got to do this because Ofsted would expect to see that, and so on. It's a lot of it is so draining, a lot of it is so unnecessary. But it takes heads who are brave and successful to say, no, we're not doing this, and who doesn't. I don't actually care what the local authority are saying or Ofsted are saying, because I want my teachers fresh and full of energy to deliver where it counts. And not all heads are in the position where they can do that. But that to me is a huge thing going forward, is not to do things that are tick-boxing exercises just to keep some inspector happy, actually trying to take unnecessary pressure off your staff. If you trust your staff and you know they're good and you've invested in them, so they have the energy and the enthusiasm, and are not too tired to really deliver where it counts, and then the staff will be happier, the pupils will be better taught. Again, it's not rocket science, but because of the system of accountability we're in and the pressure that many heads feel under, easier said than done.
Indeed, so Tim. And while you were saying that, by the magic of iPhone and other mobile phones are available, Jill Kidwell has joined us despite the tech issues she had. So Jill.
I know I've had you on a laptop and I've had you on an iPad, and now I'm on an iPhone, but eventually I'm kind of there. And I think one of the huge problems that's almost insolvable is the lack of information over what September will look like for staff. So I'm in a special secondary school and I'm writing 2 different curriculums, one for if we go into bubbles and one for if it's a normal run high school curriculum. And that's insolvable, isn't it? And so I think that part of me has to, even though I want perfection with the curriculum that I offer for these children, I have to think that's good enough. You know, there comes a point where you can't have perfection under the current system and situation, is there? That it has to be, that's the best it can be, rather than I'm striving for perfection. And I think we all as leaders are constantly striving for perfection and the absolute best we can do for the kids. And under current climate, it has to be just the best we can do. You know, it's about realising that we're under limitations beyond our control. Do you think?
I think that's so important, Jill, and I think there's great wisdom in the phrase "good enough." You know, I'm reminded of when I was pregnant with my first son, and I would be fairly active. I'd like to be on top of everything. That's how I rock. You know, remember a friend saying to me, "You're going to have to lower your standards, Sinead. You know, you can't maintain all of these things at this level because you're gonna, you know, the kid's going to come and it's going to be different." I remember thinking, no, I shall maintain all of my standards on every front. And of course, you have to adjust, and of course, you have to decide that you either drive yourself, you know, into a really unhelpful, not well place, or you accept good enough. And I think that's the wise route. So I absolutely applaud that approach. I think that's all you can do, Jill.
Yeah, I think we've got 3 or 4 members of staff who are coming back from maternity leave, and we've had 3 members of staff coming back having paternity leave. So they've had a huge change in their lives, and they're trying to balance being the best parents they can be with being the best teaching professional they can be in this current climate. And many outstanding staff that we have had to take the decision to do part-time, to come back on reduced hours, because it is impossible for them to juggle both.
Yeah. I mean, that being a teacher and being a new parent, I think, is a hell of a gig. And in this climate, that's, you know, another order of difficult. So yeah, I think that's something that isn't really well understood. But I think it's great that you're able to let people take reduced hours whilst recognizing that may not be what they or you would want. But if you've got the flexibility to do it, that's a great thing to be able to do.
Yeah, it's putting them first as well, isn't it? Because it, you know, the SLT and the leadership and the governors have all agreed to it, despite it being, no, we want you full time because you're brilliant. But we understand that if we do that to you, you probably won't be brilliant and you'll fall off the cliff.
This is it, isn't it? That's the balance. That's a really good way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't want teachers falling off the cliff, because that really wouldn't help the recruitment and retention crisis we're in. Okay, I'm conscious of time. Thank you so much for magically being able to join us, Jill. See, I'm getting prompted now because the poll's come up, which means it's time to close, and Andy needs to wave goodbye. So if you care to fill in the poll, that'd be really helpful to us. Feedback is the breakfast of champions, and it helps to know what you thought. The comments have been great. Thank you for people saying how helpful and worthwhile you found it. Do check on the NHT's website about upcoming feature attractions. We've got lots of training coming up, including the Inspiring Leadership Conference on 24th and 25th of June. But I'm going to let either Tim or Sinead have the last word. It looks like Tim's on and is about to say something. Perhaps Tim will say something, and then Sinead can say something, and then we'll close down for the day. Tim, do you want to go?
Thank you. Oh, I obviously looked like I was about to say something. No,
you did.
I, like I'm sure all those attending, have got so much out of this today. And I think the importance for me is again what you said, Sinead. It's the fact that we are talking about these issues, talking about our feelings, that there's no shame. And in fact, it's really positive to say, look, I'm having difficulties, I'm going through issues, and it's a source of strength as a school leader to say that and to recognise it in staff, not a source of weakness, which possibly for many years earlier in my career it has been. There's still work to do in changing that culture, but it is changing. And for attending a session like this today, reflecting with you and being open with ourselves and with others, it's putting us in a much healthier place. So, I mean, I personally, again, have got so much out of this, and just, Sinead, on behalf of all those attending, thank you. And as I said in my introduction, I'm really looking forward to NAHT working closely with education support, hopefully to benefit all school leaders and their well-being and mental health in the year ahead.
Brilliant. And I think I mean, delighted that we're going to carry on working with you closer than ever over the next year. And just to say to you all, I just saw a lovely comment there from Joe Butler, off to plan a third gear fortnight. That makes me very happy. Go and look after yourselves, because you're still standing. My goodness, what you've accomplished in this last period of time. Now you really do need to turn your attention to yourselves. Your staff are important, everybody else is important too, but you do need to turn attention to yourselves. So if you take anything away from this, let it be that. Look after yourselves and take care.
Brilliant, thank you. And I can't think of a better note to end on, so I think we'll end there. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you, Sinead, so much for your time. Thanks, Tim, for introducing Sinead and being with us throughout. And we'll see you at the next time. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.
Thanks a million.